What happens when a devoted wife is publicly humiliated by her husband's mistress? Do you think she crumbles in defeat? Think again. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a tale of calculated revenge and glorious transformation. You're about to witness how a woman, mocked for her simple clothes, orchestrates a downfall so epic, so perfectly executed, it brings a real estate mogul to his knees. She doesn't just get even. She redefines the entire game. Stay tuned, because the moment a seemingly meek wife arrives dressed in high fashion and the cameras start flashing, everything changes. The ballroom of disillusion, the grand ballroom of the Sterling Grand Hotel in New York City, glowed with an incandescent light that only old money and new ambition could generate. It was the annual Heart of the City Gala, a cornerstone event for the city's philanthropic elite. Crystal chandeliers, heavy as frozen waterfalls, poured light over tables laden with floral arrangements that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, the clink of champagne glasses, and the low, self-satisfied hum of the city's most powerful players. Eleanor Vance moved through the crowd with the serene grace she had cultivated over 15 years of marriage to Richard Vance. At 42, she was still a woman of classic beauty, with calm blue eyes and honey blonde hair pulled into a simple, elegant chignon. Tonight, she wore a deep sapphire blue silk dress. It was understated, tasteful, and at least 3 seasons old. In a sea of sequins, feathers, and daring necklines, Eleanor was a picture of timeless elegance, almost forgettable. She knew it, and on most nights she was comfortable with it. Tonight, however, felt different. Her husband, Richard, was a shark in a tailored Savile Row suit. He wasn't just in the room. He owned it. His real estate empire, Vance Developments, had its steel and glass tentacles wrapped around half of the New York City skyline. He was charismatic, with a booming laugh that demanded attention and a smile that could disarm his fiercest competitors. But for the past year, that smile had rarely been directed at Eleanor. She spotted him across the room, holding court near the silent auction displays. And at his side, practically fused to him, was Luna. Luna Vance was everything Eleanor was not. She was 26, her body sheathed in a gold sequin dress that glittered and left little to the imagination. She was a social media influencer, a reality TV star, a woman whose entire career was built on being seen. Her laugh was loud and guttural, a sharp contrast to the demure manners of the other women. She was Richard's mistress, a fact that was perhaps the worst-kept secret in their social circle. Eleanor's hand tightened on her small clutch. She had agreed to come tonight for the sake of appearances, a phrase that had become the unofficial motto of their marriage. "It's for the Children's Hospital, Ele. We have to show a united front," he had said in his voice, smooth as polished marble, while his eyes were already distant, probably texting Luna. She took a sip of champagne to brace herself and began the slow, familiar waltz of a society wife, moving from one conversation circle to the next, exchanging pleasantries with people she had known for years. "Eleanor, you look lovely," said Margaret Astor, her own gown a riot of high-fashion ruffles. "You as well, Margaret," Eleanor replied with a genuine smile. She genuinely liked Margaret, but her gaze kept being drawn back to Richard and Luna. They were now standing with a group that included some of Richard's most important investors, including the formidable Japanese tycoon, Mr. Kageyama. Richard was gesticulating expansively, telling a story, and Luna was clinging to his arm, looking up at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. It was a performance, and a sickeningly good one. Eleanor felt a familiar pang, a dull, aching mix of humiliation and grief. It was no longer the affair itself that hurt her most. The initial shock had settled into a kind of chronic ache. It was the brazenness of it. Richard wasn't just having an affair. He was flaunting it. He was daring her to confront him, to make a scene, knowing she was too private, too dignified to ever do so. As if sensing her attention, Luna's eyes, sharp and green as a cat's, darted across the room and met Eleanor's. A slow, smug smile spread across her perfectly made-up lips. She whispered something into Richard's ear. He glanced at Eleanor, his expression momentarily unreadable, before turning back to his audience. Later, as Eleanor was speaking to the gala's chairwoman, she heard Luna's voice, sharp and ringing, from a nearby group. "Can you believe it? She looks like she just stepped out of a 2010 catalog," Luna said, her voice dripping with condescension. A few sycophantic chuckles followed. "I mean, I get she's of a certain generation, but this is the heart of the city gala, not some suburban book club meeting. Richard has an image to maintain. It's a shame his wife doesn't seem to care." The words hit Eleanor with physical force. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public stripping of her worth, a declaration that she was no longer fit for the world she had helped Richard build. The woman who had hosted countless dinners for his clients, who had remembered their children's names and their favorite wines, who had stood by him through financial crises and corporate battles, was now being cast aside as an outdated relic by the woman who was sleeping in her husband's bed. Her cheeks burned. She wanted to turn, to walk over, and slap the smug expression off Luna's face. She wanted to scream at Richard for allowing this, for creating the atmosphere where such disrespect could flourish. But she didn't. Instead, she murmured a quiet apology and walked toward the terrace. Her posture ramrod straight, the cool night air was a relief. Below, Central Park was a dark, sprawling mystery, its edges lined by the city's lights. She gripped the cold stone balustrade with white knuckles. She had been a fool. Her dignity, her silent suffering, her belief in maintaining a united front. What had it gotten her? It had been interpreted not as strength, but as weakness, as permission. Richard found her there 10 minutes later. "There you are," he said in a breezy tone, as if he hadn't just stood by while his mistress mocked her. "Kageyama is about to leave. I want you to come say goodbye together." Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes cold. "I heard what Luna said, Richard." He had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable. He loosened his tie. "Luna can be a bit much. She's young. She doesn't understand the nuances of our world." The nuances. Eleanor's voice was dangerously low. The nuance where you allow your mistress to publicly humiliate your wife while you're trying to close a deal. Is that in the handbook? "Oh, for God's sake, Eleanor, don't be so dramatic," he snapped, his patience always short with her lately, evaporating. "It was a silly comment about a dress." "A dress? Is that what this is about? If you want a new dress, go buy one. Buy 10. Buy the whole damn store. You know I don't care about money." That was it. That was the core of his disdain. He thought it was about a dress. He thought her hurt, her humiliation, her entire identity, could be placated with an afternoon of shopping. He no longer saw her as a partner, or even a person. She was just another one of his assets, one that had apparently depreciated over time. "You're right," she said, her voice suddenly clear and completely devoid of the emotion he had expected. "It is a silly comment about a dress." Richard stared at her, taken aback by her sudden capitulation. He had expected tears, recriminations, another exhausting argument that would go nowhere. Her placid agreement unnerved him. "Good," he said cautiously. "Then let's go say goodbye to Kageyama." As she walked back into the glittering ballroom at his side, presenting the perfect picture of a supportive wife, something inside Eleanor changed. The pain didn't go away, but it crystallized. It hardened into a single, sharp purpose. Richard was right. It wasn't about the dress. It was about everything the dress represented. And he, in his arrogance, had just handed her the weapon she needed. He thought she was a relic from a bygone era. He and his loud, flashy, modern mistress thought her brand of quiet strength was obsolete. They were about to find out how wrong they were. As she smiled graciously at Mr. Kageyama, she made a silent promise. She wouldn't leave Richard. Not yet. That would be too easy, too predictable. No, she would not be the tragic wife who faded into the darkness. She would become the woman Richard couldn't afford to lose, and the woman Luna could never hope to be. The game had begun, and Eleanor Vance, a woman of a certain generation, was about to rewrite the rules. Eleanor's silent strategy begins now. What do you think her first move will be? Will she confront Luna or hire a lawyer? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The days following the gala were a study in deceptive tranquility. On the surface, nothing changed in the cavernous Vance apartment overlooking Central Park. Richard was busy, consumed by the final negotiations of the Kageyama deal. He came home late, smelling faintly of Luna's heady perfume, and left early, his mind already on spreadsheets and zoning laws. He and Eleanor moved around each other, with the distant, practiced choreography of a longtime couple who had run out of things to say. He mistook her silence for acquiescence, her calm for defeat. It was a fatal miscalculation, because for Eleanor, the apartment had transformed from a home into a headquarters. The humiliation at the gala had not broken her. It had forged her. The dull ache of betrayal had been replaced by the cold, clear fire of determination. She was no longer a victim in the story of her own life. She was the architect of her next chapter. Her first move was not toward a divorce lawyer, but toward her laptop. She didn't research asset division or custody arrangements. Instead, she spent hours in her late father's old study, a room Richard never entered, surrounded by his leather-bound books on finance and art history. Her father, a respected investment banker, had taught her more than just how to appreciate a Monet. He had taught her how to read a balance sheet, and, more importantly, how to understand that true power rarely shouts. Eleanor began to meticulously untangle her own finances from Richard's labyrinthine empire. Over the years, she had paid little attention, allowing him and his army of accountants to manage everything. Now she examined every statement, every trust, every investment vehicle that bore her name. She discovered that, thanks to a shrewd prenuptial agreement her father had insisted upon, and several inheritances she had received, she was more independently wealthy than Richard likely remembered. She wasn't just a dependent. She was a silent partner. Her second step was a phone call. Not to a friend for a tearful lunch, but to a number she hadn't dialed in over a decade. "Antoine," she said, her voice soft and sure. "It's Eleanor. Eleanor Vance." On the other end of the line, in a chic Parisian workshop, Antoine Laurent, one of the world's most revered and reclusive couturiers, paused his sketching. He remembered Eleanor, not as the wife of a brash American mogul, but as the daughter of his old friend, a young woman with an innate, quiet understanding of style that was a rarity. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm with surprise. "Ma chérie, it has been too long. What can I do for you?" "I need a dress, Antoine," she said simply. "No, I need more than a dress. I need armor." Intrigued, Antoine listened as Eleanor explained, not the sordid details of her husband's affair, but the essence of her goal. She didn't talk about revenge or humiliation. She talked about reclamation, about presence, about making a statement without uttering a single word. She was not a scorned woman. She was a patron with a vision. It was a language Antoine understood perfectly. "I'm not interested in what is in season," Eleanor concluded. I'm interested in what is timeless. Leave it to me, Antoine said, a creative spark igniting. I have an idea. Something transformative. He told her he would fly to New York for a private consultation the following week. The last piece of her initial strategy was the most crucial. Eleanor knew that a new dress, no matter how spectacular, would be just a fleeting spectacle without the right narrative. She needed to control the story. For this, she went to the best. She secured a meeting with Sylvia Vance, the head of Vance Communications, a PR firm so exclusive and effective it was known in media circles as the Queen Makers. Sylvia was a legend, sharp, impeccably dressed, and notoriously selective with her clientele. She didn't handle scandals. She built legacies. They met at a discreet tea room at the Grand Sterling. Sylvia, with her severe black bob and penetrating stare, listened intently as Eleanor laid out her situation. Once again, Eleanor was strategic. She painted a picture not of a marriage in crisis, but of a woman at a crossroads. For 15 years, I have been Mrs. Richard Vance, Eleanor explained, her hands resting calmly in her lap. I have supported his ambitions, raised our children, and managed our social obligations. I have been a partner in the building of the Vance name. Now, I feel it is time to cultivate my own identity, to step into the light on my own terms. She mentioned her desire to revive her family's dormant charitable foundation, focusing on arts education for underprivileged children, a cause she was genuinely passionate about. She was using her own story, her own name, the one she had before Vance. Sylvia watched her, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. Most women who came to her were in a panic, desperate to save a reputation. Eleanor was calm, poised, and thinking 3 moves ahead. She wasn't asking Sylvia to clean up a mess. She was inviting her to build a monument. And Richard? Sylvia asked, her voice neutral. What is his role in this evolution? Richard, as always, is focused on his business, Eleanor said, with a small, enigmatic smile. He thinks my world is very small. He has no idea of the magnitude of my plans. He thinks my greatest ambition is to redecorate the summer house in the Hamptons. Sylvia's lips curled into a rare, conspiratorial smile. Men like your husband often suffer from a lack of imagination when it comes to their wives, she observed. They see the woman they married 20 years ago, not the woman she has become. So you want to launch your foundation, and you want to do it in a way that is impossible to ignore. Exactly, Eleanor confirmed. The annual Modern Masters Gala at the Met is in 6 weeks, Sylvia said, her mind already at work. It's the most photographed event of the spring season, more press than the Heart of the City Gala, by a factor of 10. Everyone who matters in art, finance, and media will be there. That will be our stage. A plan began to form between them, a carefully orchestrated campaign of whispers and strategic leaks. They would plant stories in the right columns, not about the affair, but about the resurgence of Eleanor Vance. Stories about the revival of her family's philanthropic legacy, about her passion for art, about her quiet influence. They would build her piece by piece, creating a narrative so compelling that by the time she stepped onto that red carpet, she wouldn't just be Richard Vance's wife. She would be a force in her own right. When Eleanor returned to the apartment that afternoon, Richard was home early for once. He was on the phone, pacing the living room. "No, Luna, you can't come," he was saying, his voice a low, frustrated growl. "The Met Gala is a different beast. It's A-list only. Corporate tables. My table is for investors." "No, it's not about you. It's about business." Eleanor walked past him, a ghost in her own home. He barely glanced at her. He was too busy managing his mistress's expectations, completely oblivious to the silent revolution being plotted a few feet away. He was fighting the wrong battle, guarding the wrong front. He was so focused on the loud, glittering distraction of Luna that he didn't notice the quiet, tectonic shift happening right beneath his feet. The wife he took for granted was silently sharpening her weapons, gathering her allies, and preparing to step onto a stage he couldn't control. The 6 weeks leading up to the Met Gala were a masterclass in subtlety. While Richard was consumed by the final, frantic stages of his deal with Mr. Kageyama, a deal Eleanor knew was becoming more complicated than he let on, she was quietly building her coalition. This was not a war that would be won with shouting matches in their marble foyer, but with discreet lunches, rekindled friendships, and the slow, steady drip of information into the right channels. Her first and most important alliance was with a woman named Beatrice Dubois, the widow of a French diplomat and a revered figure in the art world. Beatrice was the cousin of Antoine, the couturier, a woman who moved with the quiet authority of someone who had seen empires rise and fall over cocktails. She had been a dear friend of Eleanor's mother, and Eleanor had always admired her wisdom and her encyclopedic knowledge of New York society. They met at a bastion of old-world charm that felt a world away from the trendy, transient spots Luna frequented. Over glasses of Sancerre, Eleanor laid out the entire story, holding nothing back. She spoke of Richard's affair, of Luna's public mockery, and of her husband's profound underestimation. Beatrice listened, her elegantly wrinkled face betraying nothing but thoughtful concentration. When Eleanor finished, she reached across the table and patted her hand. "My dear," she said, her voice a low, cultivated murmur. "Men like Richard Vance build their worlds on the foundation their wives provide. They become so accustomed to the stability that they forget the foundation is there, until it cracks." She took a sip of her wine. "So you're not just redecorating the house, you're rebuilding it on your own terms. I approve." Beatrice's approval was more than just a comfort. It was a key. It opened doors that had been closed to Eleanor for years, doors Eleanor hadn't even realized she wanted to walk through. Suddenly, Eleanor was co-hosting a private exhibition at a Chelsea gallery, being reintroduced by Beatrice to museum curators, artists, and, most importantly, the old money philanthropists of the city's elite, the very people whose respect Richard craved but could never fully command. They saw in Eleanor not Richard's appendage, but the daughter of a man they had respected, and a woman of substance in her own right. They talked about her revitalized foundation, the Vance Foundation for the Arts, with genuine interest. Her passion was authentic. Her knowledge of art history was deep. She was not a bored wife looking for a hobby. She was a serious person with a serious mission. Meanwhile, Sylvia Vance and her team worked their media magic. There were no juicy leaks about the affair. That would have been too crude, too Luna's style. Instead, a different narrative began to take shape. A small piece appeared in the style section of a major newspaper about the resurgence of discreet luxury and intellectual philanthropy, subtly contrasting it with the louder, more theatrical charity of the new money crowd. Eleanor's name was mentioned as a prime example of the former. Another article profiled legacies, the children of prominent families who were reviving their parents' charitable work. The Vance Foundation was highlighted prominently with a quote from Eleanor about her father's belief that art is the conscience of a city. There was no photo of her, only her words, which gave them more weight. These whispers were a form of psychological warfare. They didn't directly attack Richard or Luna. They simply created a world, a standard of elegance and purpose, from which Luna, by her very nature, was excluded. Luna, who documented every expensive meal and sponsored vacation on Instagram, was the embodiment of the performative culture the article subtly denounced. Richard, when he noticed any of it, was pleased. "Good press for the family," he commented one morning, seeing a mention of the Vance Foundation in a society column. "Glad you're keeping busy, Eli." He was so blinded by his own ego that he saw her activities as a charming, harmless extension of his own brand building, like a new, tastefully decorated wing of his corporate headquarters. He didn't see that it was a completely separate building, with its own foundation and its own source of power. Luna, however, was not so pleased. She saw the shift, and it infuriated her. Her world was built on attention, and suddenly a piece of that attention was being siphoned off to the boring wife. "What is this stuff I keep seeing about Eleanor's foundation?" she demanded of Richard one night, in their sleek, minimalist loft, a loft paid for by an LLC connected to Vance Developments. "She's making it look like she's the next Duchess of Sussex. It's embarrassing. People are going to think you can't control your own wife." "It's nothing, honey," Richard reassured her, distracted by a dozen other business pressures. "It's a little project to keep her happy. It means nothing, but it did mean something." Luna's insecurity began to make her careless. She became louder, more demanding. She posted increasingly lavish photos online, a new diamond bracelet, a weekend trip to Ibiza on a private jet, a close-up of a newly purchased Hermes bag artfully placed on a cafe table, a boomerang video of champagne flutes clinking with a faceless male friend she had hired for the day. Her captions were a desperate volley for relevance. "Living my best life, no worries. Some girls get degrees, others get diamonds." Her timing could not have been worse. For the first time, the world was, in fact, not bothering with Luna Vance. Her desperate displays of wealth, which only weeks ago might have been viewed as aspirational, now seemed childish and vulgar in the context of Eleanor's grand and meaningful gesture. The comment section, once her personal echo chamber of adoration, turned into a firing squad. "While you're posting selfies, his wife is changing the world. That's a lot of flash for something that looks a lot like trash. Some girls have class, others have trash, and we all know which one you are. No worries tag looks very worried." The final nail in the coffin of her public persona came not from a troll, but from her agent. The call came one afternoon. "Luna," she said, her voice tight and devoid of her usual fawning. "That luxury watch campaign we were closing, they're pulling the offer." "What? Why?" she shrieked, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. "Their brand is about timeless elegance, Luna. They feel your current public perception isn't aligned with that message. They're going in a different direction." The line went dead, leaving Luna in a silent, golden cage of her own making. Her brand, built on being the glittering center of attention, had been instantly and irrevocably devalued. She was no longer the scandalous, exciting other woman. She was just the tacky mistress of a man whose wife had just become a legend. For Richard, the consequences were more immediate and far more serious. He walked into a follow-up lunch with Mr. Kageyama and his team, expecting to finalize logistics. Instead, he found Eleanor already seated at the table, in deep conversation with Miss Kageyama. Mr. Kageyama had specifically requested her presence. The atmosphere was palpably different. The conversation was not of concrete and steel, but of art and legacy. Mr. Kageyama turned to Eleanor. "My wife was just telling me about your foundation's focus on preserving traditional art forms among the young. It is a subject very close to my heart." Eleanor replied with an erudite point about the loss of artisan skills in the digital age, her knowledge fluid, and her passion genuine. Richard could only sit there, a silent, useless observer at his own meeting. He felt a cold dread take hold of his bones as he watched the scene unfold. He had always presented himself as the lone wolf, the singular genius behind his empire. Now, Kageyama and his other investors saw that his greatest asset was the one he had neglected and disdained. They saw Eleanor not as a potential liability in a messy divorce, but as a stabilizing force, a woman of integrity. His own character, by extension, was now under review. His reckless affair was no longer a private matter. It was a blatant business risk. "Your wife is a formidable woman, Vance," Kageyama said to Richard later as they were leaving, his words a perfectly polite dagger. The strength of a company is not only in its balance sheet, but in the character of its leadership, in all its leadership. The social snub was swift and brutal. It was not a formal decree, but 1,000 tiny cuts. He called his regular golf partner, a man he had known for 20 years, only to be met with a flimsy, unbelievable excuse about a bad back. Invitations to private dinners and weekend getaways simply stopped arriving. The wives of his friends and business partners, who had once tolerated Luna's presence with forced smiles, now greeted him with an icy courtesy before turning away. They had unequivocally sided with Eleanor. She hadn't asked them to. She didn't have to. Her actions had spoken for her, and they had all heard the message. Eleanor Vance was a woman to be respected. Richard, for the first time in his life, felt powerless. He tried to confront Eleanor at their apartment that night. The space, once a monument to his success, now felt like her sovereign territory. "What was that, Eleanor?" he demanded, trying to summon his old, thundering authority. But his voice was hollow, a ghost in the vast living room. "What the hell was that whole performance?" Eleanor looked up from a foundation proposal she was reviewing, her expression as placid as a deep lake. "The performance," her voice was even and cold, "was me reminding you and everyone else who I am. I am not just your wife, Richard. I am the daughter of Robert Vance. I am a partner in this life we built, and I will not be dismissed or disrespected. Not by you, and certainly not by your mistress. You went behind my back. You're allying with my rival, Mark Santos," he spat, his face blotchy. "I built a board of directors for my foundation," she corrected him gently. The correction itself was a demonstration of power. "Mark Santos, despite your history, understands the importance of civic duty. Mrs. Kageyama has a passion for arts education. Their presence lends credibility to a cause I believe in. This was never about you, Richard. You simply assumed the world revolves around you. That has always been your problem." He stared at her, finally seeing the depth of his folly. He had poked a mama bear he thought was a kitten. He had mocked her dress, her quietness, her dignity. He had failed to comprehend that these were the very sources of her strength. He had thought power was loud, flashy, and gold-sequined. He had been wrong. Power was a dress that whispered, a strategic plan executed in silence, and a network of allies bound together by mutual respect, not money. The queen of a new realm. The final crushing blow came a week later. Richard was in his office, staring at spreadsheets that suddenly seemed meaningless when his private line rang. It was David Ortiz, the senior vice president of the bank financing the Kageyama project. "Richard," David began, in an uncomfortably formal tone. "I'm calling about the final funding tranche for the Vance Tower. The board had a meeting this morning. There are some concerns." "Concerns?" Richard repeated, his stomach clenching. "The deal is signed. Kageyama is in. Yes, we know. But our commitment is contingent upon our confidence in the project's leadership. Richard, the board is concerned about the stability of your personal leadership in light of recent public developments. The press has been extensive." The implication was as clear as it was catastrophic. The bank and the world saw Eleanor as the stable part. Without her implicitly at his side, Richard himself looked like a bad investment. He was facing financial ruin, not because of a market downturn, but because he had failed to value his wife. Eleanor, he found her in the study, a place he now entered with the apprehension of a supplicant approaching a throne. The room was full of afternoon sunlight, and she was bathed in it, an icon of tranquil authority. "They're pulling my funding, Eleanor," he said, his voice stripped of all his usual bluster. He looked defeated, smaller, a deflated man. "Because of you." Eleanor set down her pen and folded her hands on the antique desk. "No, Richard," she said, her voice not harsh, but firm as steel. "It's because of you, your choices, your arrogance, your profound lack of judgment, and your belief that the only person in this marriage who mattered was the one in the mirror." He sank into a chair across from her, the leather sighing under his weight. "What do you want, Ele?" he whispered, using the old, familiar diminutive. It sounded foreign, unearned. "A divorce? Half of everything?" "Everything." Eleanor considered it for a long moment. She could ruin him completely. She had the power, the influence, and the justification to do so. But she had never been motivated by pure vengeance. Her goal had been reclamation, not destruction. "I want respect, Richard," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, forcing him to lean in. "And I want a new arrangement. Our marriage as we knew it is over. That is not negotiable. From now on, we are business partners. You will run your company, and I will run my foundation. We will maintain a public facade of civility for the sake of our children and our remaining business interests." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Your affair with Luna Vance will end, immediately and permanently. You will provide a generous but final settlement, the terms of which my lawyer will draft. It will include an unbreakable non-disclosure agreement. She will disappear from our lives and from the public eye. If I see a single cryptic social media post from her, that agreement will be voided. Is that clear?" He could only nod, his eyes wide. "We will live in this house as co-residents, but not as a couple. We will attend important events together when necessary as partners in Vance developments, but our private lives will be completely separate. These are my terms. They are not negotiable." Richard looked at the woman before him, poised, powerful, and in complete control. And he knew he had no other option. He had lost. He had been so busy disdaining his wife, so confident in her meekness, that he had never seen her rise above him. He nodded slowly, the architect of a crumbling empire, brought to his knees not by a market downturn or a corporate raider, but by the quiet, indomitable will of the woman whose dress he had let his mistress laugh at. Eleanor Vance had not just won the battle. She had redrawn the entire map of their world, and in this new world, she was, and would forever be, the queen. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about quiet confidence, strategic thinking, and knowing your own infinite worth. She transformed humiliation into empowerment and gave everyone who underestimated her a lesson they would never forget. What did you think of Eleanor's epic comeback? Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone so completely turned the tables on their detractors? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story of drama and triumph captivated you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss another real-life story.